So I asked myself if there was anything that I thought I did that gave me a competitive advantage over other programmers. And there was immediately three things that jumped to my mind that I feel like because I do them, I have an advantage, and they've been super helpful that I do them. So I figured I would share them with you guys because they're all things that are easy to pick up and that you could start doing today. So we're going to go through them. Let's start with number one, and that is Vim. So Vim is what I use to do all my coding. So Vim is a text editor, but it also is a bunch of key bindings that you can add to IDEs. So for example, I use VS Code as my main editor, and so I have the Vim extension in here. So what Vim is it's a bunch of short keys you can think of. And what it allows me to do is I can just basically type code faster and move code around faster, right? So if I want to move this import down, I can, and you can just see I can undo it very quickly. And this all happens from your keyboard. So the idea is you never leave your keyboard. So I am typing, but I can also go in and manipulate code all from my keyboard. And so I don't have to go over to my mouse, scroll around. Like let's say I want to go to the top of the page or the bottom of the page. So here what I would do is I'd go to my mouse, I'd scroll to the very bottom, and now I'm here, right? And again, there may be a hotkey for that, and there is in Vim. But so like for example, I push G twice to go to the top, capital G to go to the bottom. I use Shift and then what is this, bracket I guess, to move chunks of code. It's very helpful. This is me just moving chunks of code at a time. See how my cursor is moving around? That's pretty nice. This one I like to use a lot where I will change the word into a letter. So let's say I want to change the word update. So I want to say maybe change instead of update. I can change into the O like that. And I freaking love undoing in Vim. Just undo that real quick. Macros are a blast. I just really have a great time coding in Vim. Like I really enjoy the experience as well. And you're also just able to manipulate code at a much faster rate. If you take a programmer who is coding in Vim versus someone who's not coding in Vim, you're going to notice a significant difference in just the way they're able to handle the code. I also think this counts if you use Emacs or something like that. I'm not really religious about Vim. I think any kind of key bindings, knowing them well, and coding is going to pay off huge in the long run. Again, I know it does take like a little bit to get up to speed, but it pays off huge. Like I don't even consider myself like an advanced Vim user. I would say like I'm intermediate at most, and I get a ton of gain from it. And there's people that do way cooler stuff than I do, but that's Vim for you. I highly recommend learning it. To learn it, what I did is I used Vim Tutor. So go Google how you can install that on your computer. And basically, it's going to walk you through the beginning stuff of Vim. And then after that, I just recommend going cold turkey. Like everything you code after that, you should be using Vim. I think it's fine to use the Vim plugin in VS Code. Some people are a little elitist about that and recommend just using like Vim itself. That's probably good to start off with, is probably the Vim editor, probably, so you get that experience. But I don't think it's that big of a deal if you want to learn in VS Code, because some of the VS Code features are super nice, and that's really what I do now is I mix Vim in that. But yeah, that's Vim. That's tip number one. I feel like because I'm using Vim, I'm able to just like do stuff with code way faster. All right, so tip number two, or thing number two, is I really know data structures and algorithms pretty well. And so the reason why I do is in school, my class was actually pretty bad. And so the algorithms class I learned probably nothing in. So what I decided to do is just take an online course at Coursera as I was taking the class. I also ended up doing an MIT course as well. And so basically, when I was in college for computer science, I took some Coursera and MIT courses on data structures and algorithms, and that supplemented things very well to what I was learning in college. And I think if you don't know this, it's going to hurt you. And so especially when I see people that are coming from boot camps and maybe they dip into data structures just a little bit or not at all, I think they are at a major disadvantage. And the other thing that I did for a little bit was competitive programming. Like I would jam on Sphere Online Judge for a while. And what this is, if you've never heard of competitive programming, is you're basically given a problem like this, where you're basically given an example input, and they ask you some question, and then you have to write some code to solve that problem. And what you do is you just paste your code in there, and there you go. And then there's competitions for this where they give you like 6 problems you get to solve in like an hour or 3 hours, depending on the event. And then the first people to finish all the coding problems win. So for just like a tiny bit of time, I did that. And so they're basically all data structure and algorithm problems. I don't think you really have to go to this extreme. This is one of the reasons why I actually stopped doing this kind of once I got into it, was because I felt like it was kind of useless after a little bit, because you start learning some really obscure algorithms you never use, and it kind of gets straight useless. So I don't think you need to go super, super deep into data structures. As soon as you start getting into things where you're just learning obscure ones that, you're like, when am I ever going to use this? That's when I stopped doing data structures. But I think at least having a good fundamental knowing all the ones you have available to you is very powerful. And knowing like big O notation and the run times of these things is huge. And I think it really comes down to when you come across a hard problem, someone who has a fundamentals and data structures has some ideas, has like a toolkit of some things they may be able to try out for this particular problem. And so I highly recommend, if you took a boot camp or you didn't take a very good algorithms class in college, or you didn't go to college, take like a Coursera course. There's a ton of them now that you can take. I think I did the Princeton one, but I can't remember which one. But there's a ton of colleges that are give them out for free now. So take one of these. It's going to help you out a ton. And the last thing is kind of a joke, but it's kind of not at the same time, and it is sleeping. So this is something that I at least get 9 hours a day, and I feel like because of that, I have a huge advantage. Especially in college, but even in the workplace, I see it all the time, is there's just zombies all around you, and you're just not thinking clearly if you're not sleeping an adequate amount each night. And so compared to like just the clarity of thinking that you get from sleeping, like I shouldn't even have to say this, right? But honestly, I see people every day, I talk to them every day, and they're just zombies. And so they're just not going to be at the same level. And so that is like the biggest thing. Like, ask yourself right now, how are you feeling? Are you tired? I'm actually a little tired. But yeah, I mean, I like, this also comes down to like, there's really a diminishing return in programming as well. Like, if you're spending a long time programming, you're going to hit like this point where you're like, oh crap, like your brain starts introducing bugs into your code faster than you're actually improving the code itself. That also goes into how long you're actually just coding at a single point of time. But also, if you're not sleeping a good amount, you're basically a zombie the next day, and you're just going to be introducing bugs into your code. And I think the biggest thing, this also goes back to data structures as well. I think like if you have a good foundation in this and you are sleeping enough, you're able to see into the future and like predict some of the cases and some of the things that may happen with your code. And I feel like you can forget about, and if you're not sleeping enough, it's just like, you're not in that zone, you're in that flow zone, you're not thinking in the future how it's going to affect your code. I think it can, go past you, and you can miss a lot of corner cases and introduce things that are going to cause problems later. So I feel like you can solve a lot of problems up front, and you have less bugs up front that way. But there you go. Those are the 3 things that stood out in my mind that I was like, yeah, these are all things that anyone could be doing. And I feel like the programmers that are doing these things have a huge advantage.